there, I'm Kathy McMahon, author of the award-winning chapter book series Mortimer and Me. And this 8-book series features a boy named Jimmy, who's 8 years old and in 3rd grade, and a moose named Mortimer. And it goes through a bunch of adventures that these two go on together. So the first book starts out with we meet Jimmy and Mortimer. Jimmy moves from Arizona to Wisconsin and has a little bit of trouble making friends until this big old friendly moose called Mortimer comes walking in onto the playground. And I won't go through each of the books, but I want to give you an idea of how it starts out and how each book progresses as Jimmy moves through 3rd grade and then on into 4th grade. And by the time we get to the last book, Moose on the Run, this came out last fall, and it brought Jimmy to the end of 4th grade. And at that point, I had a decision to make. Do I keep on with more adventures with Jimmy and Mortimer and a group of friends called the Trailblazers, or do I kind of leave it there and have him go on to 5th grade into the sunset of his life or whatever? But I was trying to decide what to do next. So at that point, I had been making a lot of school visits and doing book events, and I had a lot of readers who kept asking me, why don't you write a book with a girl main character? Because even though there are girls in these books, there's no one, the main character is a boy. And so I decided, well, why not? Because I wasn't quite done with the antics that Mortimer could get himself into. So I decided to start a new series, and it is going to feature Jimmy's younger sister, Lily. So when that first book starts out, Lily will be the same age as Jimmy was when the first book of the Mortimer series came out. So this will be called Mortimer and Lily, and we'll start her in 3rd grade with a whole different set of ideas that she comes up with for her and Mortimer and her friends to go on. So I thought before we start this series, and I'm working on it right now, I'm working on the first book, which is called Moose in Training. I won't tell you what he's in training for, but you can imagine Lily is trying to train him to do something for a school project. And so this series is going to have a whole new look, has a new illustrator, Tanya Bowerly, who you will meet a little bit later on, and we'll have a whole different feel to it. So I thought, well, I haven't done anything for my YouTube channel in a while, so I thought, why not take you through my writing process? And I know I get a lot of questions about that. What's your writing routine? How do you come up with your ideas? Things like that. And so I'm going to do a series of these, the part of my writing process. And so I thought today I would just focus on how did I start out? How do I get the idea from my brain onto paper, onto the computer? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how to get started. And so if you are an aspiring author and would like to know how to do it, it's pretty much up to whatever your own style is, but I want to tell you a little bit about how I did it myself. So once I came up with the idea to have Lily as my main character, she has 2 of her best friends that are also in the adventures with her. One is Kieko, who is a girl that lives across the street. She's her best friend. And she is Asian, and so her name is Japanese. Her father is Chinese, her mother's Japanese. And then we have Gabriel, who is a boy that lives down the street a ways. And if you know the Mortimer series, you know the book House on Briarwood Lane, which was a spooky mystery with Jimmy and Mortimer, and Gabriel is the younger brother that lives in that house. So so those are they're going to be a threesome that are going to take on this task of trying to train Mortimer to do something for their school project. So they're just starting 3rd grade, and they have a teacher named Mrs. Murphy who's from Ireland. So this is going to have a whole Irish theme to it. So how did I come up with all these? So first of all, I have a notebook that I start out with, all right, that I dedicate one notebook to all of my ideas for this series. And so I had to and I do things in longhand, first of all, before I even touch the computer. I just write things down. I find that my ideas flow better when I get them down, and I've always been this way. I've always taken notes. I've been a big note taker because I remember things better that way. So I started jotting down some ideas about Lily, first of all, develop her character, and then what would I have her do with Mortimer. And so I came up with a few ideas that kind of centers on her personality. But then I came up with, I had my character in the Mortimer series, a popular character was the teacher, Mr. Delgado. And since I have a teaching background, and I got a lot of good response from that, I thought I would put that to use in this series as well. So this is going to be a series that features Mrs. Murphy, the 3rd grade teacher. And so, and having her be from Ireland adds a whole layer to that. So after I get my initial ideas written down, then I have to do some research. So once I figured out that they were going to have to come up with some sort of community project, then I go to my computer and I start researching. And so I'm Googling school projects that kids do, or things about moose. What could a moose do? Now granted, Mortimer is not your ordinary moose. He's not a typical moose that you find in the wild. He has a little personality of his own. So I do have him do some human-like things, but I try to keep him as much as a moose as possible. So I did some research. I researched Ireland. I've been to Ireland myself a couple of times, and so and I have Irish in my own genealogy, so that was kind of fun to do that. So I just start writing, and I just start taking notes, and you will see that I've come up with another idea. So I'll write something in the column. I just brainstorming is basically what it is. So once I brainstorm all of my ideas, projects that they could possibly do in the classroom, Irish names, places, all of that kind of stuff. I just brainstorm all these ideas, and then I have to start putting it down on paper, because it's one thing to have all these ideas and another thing to be able to put those ideas into a story that makes sense. So if you talk to any author, you'll find out that there are basically 2 categories of authors. There's a pantser, or there's a plotter. Now, a pantser is a person that just sits down and just writes their story by the seat of their pants. And I wrote actually the first 3 books of the Mortimer and Me series. I pretty much just pantsed that. I just sat down and I let the story just take me wherever it was going to take me. But by the time I got to the 4th book in the series, when Jimmy was going into 4th grade and it was going to be a book that centered on science and space, I thought I better plan this out a little bit better. So I actually started outlining at that point. So that's what a plotter does. A plotter will plan ahead of time what is the book going to look like, what's the story going to look like. So once I started doing an outline, then I was able to identify things like the inciting incident, and that's where when you introduce your character to your audience, what their world is like, and then the inciting incident is something that happens that's going to turn the character's world upside down. And so Then after that, you want to identify different obstacles that come in the way of the goal. How are we going to get from the beginning to the middle to the end, and all of those things. And so I found it a lot easier if I kind of outlined those ideas before actually starting to write it, that then I would be able to write a lot easier, and I found that to be true. So now I'm kind of a combination of both. I like to outline ahead of time to identify those different turning points in the story, and then when I start to actually write the story itself, then I kind of let the characters take over and go from there. So that's the first phase of my writing process, is to come up with an idea, develop my characters, do some research, and then outline the story. And so my next session that I will bring to you at a different time will be how do you write an outline. So that's how we're going to start this series and see how it happens. So thanks for tuning in.